Millionaire invited the maid to his private island for a simple task, but what she uncovered shattered him. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. The wind off the Atlantic carried a salty chill as the helicopter descended toward Hale Island, the millionaire's private retreat floating miles off the coast. Claire Dawson sat rigid in the rear seat, her hands gripping the fabric of her simple uniform, the vibrations humming through her bones. She had cleaned penthouses before, even one or two mansions, but never a place you needed a pilot to reach. From the window, the island looked unreal, white sand, tall pines, a glass mansion perched above the cliffs like something out of a billionaire's daydream. Yet the man who owned it, Ethan Hale, had barely spoken to her when he arrived at the estate where she worked part-time and handed her the sealed offer: 3 days on the island, 1 room to clean, $20,000. No explanation. No eye contact. Just a quiet, heavy tension that clung to him like a shadow. As the skids touched down, Claire stepped onto the helipad, her sneakers meeting the smooth concrete warmed by the afternoon sun. The air smelled of cedar and sea spray. Ethan was already striding toward the house, not waiting, not slowing, expecting her to follow. In the story staff whispered about him, Ethan Hale was brilliant, reclusive, and colder than winter steel. But as Claire watched the way his shoulders tightened when a gull screeched overhead, she sensed something else, someone carrying a weight that bent him even in the sun. She hurried after him, her heart thudding fast. She had no room for mistakes, she needed the money, needed it so badly her throat tightened every time she thought of her mother's medical bills stacked on the kitchen counter. Inside, the mansion was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the ocean, and polished wood floors glowed under the soft light. Yet the place felt strangely untouched. As if time had paused here. Ethan stopped at the base of a staircase and finally looked at her, his blue eyes cool but not unkind. You'll find your room prepared. Mrs. Whitford will show you the rest. You begin tomorrow. His voice was steady, controlled, like someone afraid of letting anything slip. Claire nodded, her pulse skipping. She sensed the unspoken truth, she wasn't just here to clean. She was here because the room he wanted touched had been locked for years. And whatever waited behind that door was the reason the millionaire who owned an island carried grief like a second skin. Mrs. Whitford led Claire down a wide hallway lined with soft interior lights, each glow reflecting off the polished glass that looked out toward the ocean. The house was quiet in a way that felt intentional, as if someone had removed all traces of ordinary life. Claire walked a step behind the older woman, trying to steady her breathing. She had expected extravagance, maybe even arrogance, but not this hush that settled into her bones. Mrs. Whitford stopped at a guest room near the end of the hall. The door opened smoothly, revealing a space far nicer than anything Claire had ever stayed in. Crisp sheets, warm beige tones, a view of the water stretching past the horizon. You will be comfortable here, Mrs. Whitford said, her voice gentle. Mr. Hale prefers the island to stay calm. Keep your movements quiet, respect the boundaries he has set, and everything will be fine. Claire nodded, placing her small duffel bag on the bench at the foot of the bed. He seems different than I expected, she said carefully. The older woman paused, eyes softening with something that looked like sympathy. Loss changes people. Some more deeply than others. You will see in time. Before Claire could ask anything, Mrs. Whitford excused herself, leaving the door half open. Claire stood still for a moment, listening. Somewhere upstairs, a floorboard creaked lightly under Ethan's steps. Not pacing. Just moving slowly, as if thinking with each stride. Claire slipped into the bathroom to wash her face. The marble countertop felt cool under her fingertips. She stared at her reflection, trying to gather herself. 3 days. 1 room. $20,000. She repeated the facts like a mantra. But the unease in her stomach refused to settle. When she stepped back into the bedroom, she noticed something on the nightstand. A small, folded note. Her name written in clean, even handwriting. She hesitated, then opened it. Begin only when the morning light reaches the west wall. No signature. No instruction about which room. But she knew. The room he never entered. The one he could not face. Evening settled over the island, washing the sky in shades of amber and lavender. Claire made her way to the kitchen, following the faint scent of herbs and warm bread. Mrs. Whitford offered her a simple dinner, and while they ate at the long counter, Claire asked softly, "Has he always been this distant?" The older woman folded her hands, considering her answer. "He used to laugh," she said quietly. "He used to fill the house with invitations and summer gatherings. But that was before the accident on the mainland. Before everything changed." Claire felt her chest tighten. She did not press further. After dinner, she stepped outside for a moment, the air cool against her skin. The ocean whispered below the cliffs, steady and patient. Lights glowed faintly through the windows of the upper floor where Ethan stayed. She wondered what memories haunted him there. When she returned to her room, she found the hallway dimmer than before, as if the house itself was settling into sleep. Claire sat at the edge of the bed, listening to the soft hum of distant waves. She had come for the money, for survival. Yet something about this place tugged at her, something quiet and aching behind the polished surfaces and untouched rooms. As she lay back, staring at the ceiling, she heard a faint sound above her. Not heavy. Not alarming. Just a slow, deliberate step, then another. Ethan walking alone in the darkness, carrying a weight she did not yet understand. And tomorrow, when the morning sun touched the west wall, she would walk into the room that held the truth he could not bear to face. Morning arrived gently on Hale Island, the sunlight stretching across the west wall of Claire's room just as the note had instructed. She sat up slowly, feeling the familiar mix of nerves and determination settle beneath her ribs. Today she would enter the room Ethan had avoided for years, the one he trusted no one else to touch. She dressed quietly in her simple uniform, smoothing the fabric. As if that small gesture could steady her heartbeat. When she stepped into the hallway, the house was silent except for the muted hum of the ocean outside. Mrs. Whitford was not in sight, which somehow made the moment feel even heavier. Claire made her way toward the second floor, each step soft on the carpeted stairs. At the end of the hall stood an unremarkable door, painted the same warm white as the others, yet carrying a presence that made her breath pause. She reached for the handle, half expecting it to resist, but it turned easily. The room inside was filled with dust particles drifting like slow snowflakes in the sun. It was not large, but it held a warmth that did not match the rest of the house. Pale yellow curtains framed the window. A small bookshelf leaned slightly to the left, filled with children's stories. A set of plush animals sat in a perfect row, untouched. A tiny bed stood against the wall, made with care long ago, the fabric patterned with small stars. Claire felt something shift quietly inside her. This was a child's room. A room frozen in time. She began to dust the surfaces gently, taking care not to disturb the small details. A seashell bracelet lay on the bedside table, too small for an adult wrist. Claire wrapped her fingers around it for a moment before placing it exactly where she found it. She did not know the story yet, but she could feel its weight in the air. As she worked, she noticed a narrow wooden chest pushed beneath the window. It did not have a lock, but it looked intentionally closed, as if someone had shut it with a final gesture. She did not attempt to open it, remembering the boundaries she had agreed to respect. She simply wiped the top gently, her touch respectful. Behind her, a soft creak sounded in the doorway. Claire turned and found Ethan standing there, his posture rigid, his hands still at his sides. His eyes did not scan the room. They stayed fixed on a single spot near the plush animals, almost as if afraid to see anything more. Claire straightened, unsure if she had done something wrong. Ethan's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "You came in at the right time." She nodded, keeping her tone gentle. "I followed the note." His gaze flickered, a hint of surprise breaking through the distance. "Most people rush. They do too much. Move too quickly." Claire shook her head softly. "This room does not feel like a place for rushing." Ethan looked at her then, really looked, and in that moment she realized he was not a cold man. He was a man carrying memories like glass, fragile and sharp. He took one slow step inside, but no further. "If it becomes too difficult," he said quietly, "you can walk out." Claire met his eyes, steady and sincere. "I will take care of it. I promise." For the first time since she arrived on the island, something in Ethan's expression softened, the smallest crack in the walls he lived behind. Then, without another word, he stepped back and disappeared down the hall, leaving Claire alone with the gentle sunlight, the quiet toys, and the ache of a story she had only begun to understand. The rest of the morning moved in a quiet rhythm as Claire continued tending to the small room, her movements slow and thoughtful. Every object she dusted seemed to hold a whisper of a life once lived here. A watercolor set with half-used paint blocks. A tiny pair of shoes placed neatly beside the bookshelf. A small photo frame turned face down on the dresser, as if someone could not bear the sight of what it held. Claire did not touch it. She simply noted its presence, feeling the same respectful restraint she had when approaching the wooden chest. By midday, the sun had shifted, casting soft beams across the floor like warm ribbons of light. Claire stepped back to survey her progress, and for a moment she let herself breathe. It felt as if the room, untouched for so long, had finally exhaled. As she turned to leave, she noticed something she had missed before, a small notebook partially hidden beneath the bed frame. It was not intentionally tucked away, more like forgotten in a hurried moment. She crouched down, reaching for it, but stopped before her fingers brushed the cover. She remembered Ethan's boundaries, the weight in his eyes, the unspoken history lingering in this space. She slid the notebook back gently, leaving it where it had been. When she stepped into the hallway, she nearly collided with Ethan standing there. He was not dressed in the usual crisp attire she had seen him in. Instead, he wore a simple gray sweater and dark jeans, his hair slightly tousled as if he had run his hands through it too many times. He looked past her into the room, not stepping inside. "You remembered not to touch the things that matter most," he said quietly. Claire swallowed, unsure how he knew what she had almost done. "It did not feel like my place," she answered softly. "Some things want to stay where they were last held." For a moment, Ethan closed his eyes as if bracing against an invisible tide. When he opened them, the storm she sensed behind them had dimmed just a little. "You have good instincts," he said. "Most people would not understand." They walked downstairs together, not speaking until they reached the kitchen. Mrs. Whitford had prepared a simple lunch, but she excused herself when Ethan entered, leaving the two of them alone in the wide, sunlit space. Ethan leaned against the counter, his posture a mix of exhaustion and uncertainty. "I brought you here because you are careful," he said finally. "You treat things with respect." Claire folded her hands, unsure whether to meet his eyes. "I just try to be gentle," she said. "Sometimes gentleness is the only way to keep something from breaking further." Ethan turned his head slightly, studying her as if seeing a truth he had not expected. "People say that time heals," he murmured. "But time only dulls things. It never returns what was lost." Claire felt her chest ache at the quiet confession. "Maybe it does not return what was lost," she said. "But it can make room for something new. Something that does not erase, but softens the edges." Ethan looked down at the counter, his fingers tapping once before falling still. "I cannot open that room," he said. "Not without feeling like the world is tilting." Claire's voice was gentle. Then let me hold it steady while you stand in the doorway. A long silence stretched between them. Not heavy, not sharp. Something softer. A bridge beginning to form. Ethan nodded once, barely visible but full of meaning. Not today, he said quietly. But maybe soon. Claire accepted that answer with a calm heart. She knew healing never moved fast. It moved when someone finally felt safe enough to take the next step. The afternoon settled over Hale Island. With a softness that made every sound feel closer, as if the world had drawn in a deep breath. Claire spent the early hours tending to lighter tasks around the house, folding linens, sweeping the hallway near the atrium, and quietly moving through each room the way one might move through a library filled with memories. She sensed Ethan nearby more often than before, not in an intrusive way, but in subtle moments when she would turn and catch a glimpse of him standing at a window or lingering briefly at a doorway as if trying to understand her presence. Later in the day, while Claire polished the glass railing overlooking the ocean, she heard footsteps behind her. Ethan approached with careful steps, carrying 2 mugs of warm tea. He held one out to her without a word. She accepted it with a quiet thank you, surprised by the gesture. They stood side by side, watching the waves crash gently below the cliffs. The silence between them was no longer strained. It felt thoughtful, almost comforting. Ethan spoke first, his voice low. "You did well this morning." Claire nodded, letting the steam from the mug warm her hands. "It is a beautiful room," she said softly. "It feels loved." Ethan's jaw tensed, but he did not turn away. "It was my daughter's," he said quietly. "She was 5. Claire held her breath. He had never spoken of her directly. Not to the staff. Not to visitors. Not even to Mrs. Whitford, as far as Claire understood. She did not interrupt. Ethan continued, his words careful, as if each one had to find its courage before leaving him. Every summer, she would beg to come here. She loved the tide pools. She said the shells here were different than anywhere else. Claire listened, her heart aching in a quiet, steady way. "It sounds like she was wonderful," she said gently. "She was light," Ethan replied. "Pure light." A long silence followed, and for a moment, Claire thought the conversation was over. But then Ethan exhaled softly. "I kept the room exactly as it was. I thought freezing it in time would keep the memories from slipping away. But the truth is, I have not stepped inside since the day I closed the door." Claire looked down at the mug in her hands. "Sometimes holding on too tightly can make the pain sharper," she said. "Letting the room breathe again does not mean letting her go." Ethan's eyes softened with something fragile and human. "You speak as if you understand." Claire hesitated before answering. "When I was younger, my mother kept my brother's room untouched for years after he passed. I watched her visit the doorway but never step inside. One day, I helped her go in again. We cried for a long time. It did not erase the grief. It just made it gentler." Ethan studied her quietly, as if seeing someone who carried her own history of loss. "You have lived more than your age suggests," he murmured. Claire offered a small, almost shy smile. "Life asks a lot from some people sooner than it should." They stood there a little longer, letting the sound of the ocean fill the space where words had settled. As the sky shifted toward dusk, Ethan spoke again. "Tomorrow," he said, his gaze fixed on the horizon, "I want to try stepping into the room. Not alone. If you would stay nearby." Claire's heart tightened with a soft mix of empathy and honor. "I will be there," she said. "You will not have to do it alone." Ethan nodded once, almost imperceptibly, but with the weight of someone taking their first real step toward healing. And for the first time since Claire set foot on the island, the house did not feel frozen in grief. It felt as if something inside it had quietly begun to turn toward the light. Morning came with a soft overcast glow, the kind that muted the colors of Hale Island and made the ocean look like brushed silver. Claire woke with a knot of anticipation beneath her ribs, remembering Ethan's quiet request from the evening before. She dressed slowly, smoothing her uniform as if the fabric could steady her thoughts, then stepped into the hallway where the house still rested in early morning silence. She found Ethan in the atrium, standing near the tall windows with his hands in his pockets. He looked as if he had been awake for hours. His expression carried that familiar weight, yet there was something else now, something gentler in the way he acknowledged her presence. "Are you ready?" Claire asked softly. Ethan exhaled. "I do not know if ready is the word," he said. "But I want to try." They walked upstairs together, their footsteps quiet against the carpet. When they reached the small door at the end of the hall, Ethan hesitated. He placed his hand on the doorknob and paused, his shoulders rising with a slow breath. Claire stood close enough for him to feel her presence, but not so close as to crowd him. "Take your time," she whispered. Ethan nodded once, then turned the handle. The door opened with a soft click. The room looked exactly as Claire had left it the day before, bathed once again in gentle light. Ethan did not cross the threshold at first. He stood still, his gaze fixed on the tiny bed with the star-patterned fabric. "I tucked her in there every night," he murmured, the memory almost too delicate for sound. Claire listened quietly, giving him the space he needed. "She would ask for the same story," he continued. "The one about the girl who collected shells and believed they carried pieces of the sea." His voice trembled slightly, but he did not look away. After several long moments, he stepped inside, his motion slow, almost reverent. Claire followed, stopping near the bookshelf while he moved to the small table by the window. His fingers brushed the edge of the seashell bracelet. He picked it up, holding it carefully as if it might dissolve in his hand. "She made this for me," he said. "She said the ocean never forgets kindness." Claire felt her throat tighten at the gentle wisdom of a child who had loved deeply. "It is beautiful," she said. Ethan set the bracelet down carefully, then moved toward the plush animals arranged neatly on the shelf. He touched one lightly, his expression softening into an aching tenderness. "She used to name them after constellations," he said. "She believed they protected her dreams." Claire's heart ached at the quiet longing in his voice. "Dreams can still be protected," she said gently. "Even when the person who inspired them is no longer here." Ethan turned slightly, meeting her eyes. For the first time, there was no guarded distance in his expression. Only vulnerability, open and unshielded. "You make this feel less impossible," he said quietly. Claire stepped forward just a little. "You are not meant to carry this alone," she answered. Ethan drew in a slow breath, absorbing her words as if they offered something he had not allowed himself to feel in years. Then his gaze shifted toward the wooden chest under the window, the one Claire had refused to open. "There is something inside it," he said. "Something I have not touched since that day." Claire nodded. "You do not have to open it now," she said. "Or ever. What matters is that you are here. What matters is the step you took." Ethan looked at the chest again, then shook his head softly. "Not today," he whispered. "But maybe soon." Claire felt the room settle around them in a warm, fragile stillness. The air no longer felt frozen. It felt alive, cautious but moving. When they left the room together, Ethan closed the door gently behind them, not as a barrier, but as someone choosing the pace of his own healing. And for the first time since she arrived, Claire sensed that the house itself carried a new sound, faint but certain, like the beginning of a long-awaited exhale. The day moved slowly after Ethan stepped out of the room, as if the island itself sensed the emotional shift he had just taken. Claire returned to light tasks around the house, but her mind lingered on the expression he wore when he touched his daughter's bracelet. There had been sorrow, yes, but also the faint glimmer of someone remembering love rather than loss. Near late afternoon, clouds gathered over the horizon, stretching long shadows across the glass walls of the mansion. The air cooled slightly, carrying the scent of the ocean farther inland. Claire ventured onto the balcony to shake out a cloth when she noticed Ethan standing alone near the edge of the cliff path, his figure steady but contemplative. For a moment she considered giving him space, but something in the tilt of his shoulders made her walk toward him. The gravel crunched lightly under her shoes, and Ethan turned at the sound. His expression softened the moment he saw her. "I hope I did not interrupt your work," he said. Claire shook her head. "You are not interrupting anything." Ethan nodded, looking back toward the water. The tide was rolling in, swirling white foam around the dark rocks. "I keep thinking about what you said," he murmured. "About letting the room breathe again." Claire stood beside him, hands resting lightly on the railing. "Grief does not disappear when we avoid it," she said. "It only grows quiet until something wakes it again. Today you faced it. That matters." Ethan exhaled, the breath long and steady. "I never intended to shut the world out this completely," he admitted. "But after the accident, every room, every hallway, every voice felt too loud. The island was the only place where nothing demanded anything from me." Claire considered his words. "Sometimes isolation feels safe," she said. "But it does not heal. It only hides the hurt." Ethan looked at her, his eyes carrying a mix of gratitude and disbelief. "You speak with such clarity," he said. "How did you learn to understand people like this?" Claire hesitated, then answered softly, "Life can teach you through pain just as much as joy. My family went through difficult times. It changed how I listen." Ethan held her gaze for a long moment, and something in the set of his shoulders relaxed, as if he had been holding a breath for years and finally let a small part of it go. They walked along the cliff path together, not speaking for several minutes. The wind tugged gently at their clothes, carrying the distant call of seabirds. When they reached a small outcropping overlooking the waves, Ethan stopped. "There is something I have never shown anyone," he said quietly. "Not since the day everything happened." Claire waited, giving him time. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. The edges were worn, softened by years of being carried. He unfolded it with care. Inside was a drawing done in bright crayon colors, the lines uneven in the way only a child's hand could make. It showed a little girl with a wide smile, holding hands with a man whose hair resembled Ethan's. Above them, a sun with long beams filled the sky. Claire felt her heart lift and ache all at once. "She drew this the day before," Ethan said, his voice steady but tender. "She said it was us. She said the sun was always shining when we were together." Claire touched the corner of the drawing gently, careful not to disturb the fragile paper. "It is beautiful," she whispered. Ethan folded it again with reverence and slipped it back into his pocket. "I do not know why I showed you," he said softly. "I just felt that you would understand." Claire looked at him with quiet sincerity. "You do not have to explain," she said. "Sometimes the heart chooses who it feels safe with." Ethan's breath caught slightly, not in pain, but in a quiet recognition of truth. As they turned back toward the house, the first hints of evening light brushed the sky, and for the first time since his daughter's passing, Ethan walked not as a man trapped by grief, but as someone beginning to see the possibility of warmth returning to his world. The next morning rose with a gentle warmth, casting soft gold across the island as if the sky itself wished to encourage Ethan forward. Claire moved quietly through the mansion, tidying small corners and straightening cushions, but her thoughts drifted to the conversation they shared by the cliffs. There had been a shift in him, subtle yet undeniable, like someone finally stepping out from beneath a long shadow. When she reached the kitchen, she found Mrs. Whitford preparing breakfast with a calm focus. The older woman glanced at Claire with an expression that suggested she had sensed the emotional turning of the past day. "He seems lighter," Mrs. Whitford said gently. Claire nodded. "He took a step he has avoided for a long time." The older woman offered a small, grateful smile. "He trusts you," she said. "That is not something he gives easily." Claire carried a tray to the dining room, arranging it neatly. Moments later, she heard footsteps and turned to see Ethan approaching, dressed simply and with a quietness that did not feel heavy, but contemplative. He gave a faint smile. "Good morning," he said. Claire returned it softly. "Good morning." They ate together in an easy silence, the kind that felt natural rather than strained. When they finished, Ethan stood and gestured toward the glass corridor that led toward the gardens. "There is something I would like to show you," he said. Claire followed him outside, where a winding path of stone curved through lush greenery. The scent of lavender drifted in the air as they walked. After a few minutes, the path opened into a small greenhouse made entirely of glass, filled with potted plants of all sizes. Sunlight filtered through the roof, casting shifting patterns of light across the walkway. Ethan pushed the door open quietly. Inside, the space felt warm and peaceful. Delicate vines climbed wooden stakes, and small bursts of color peeked from among green leaves. "She loved it here," Ethan said softly. "This was our project. Every summer we would plant something new. She said it made the earth remember her." Claire stepped toward a small pot near the center, where a young plant with pale pink blooms stood. "It is beautiful," she said. Ethan nodded. "It was the last thing we planted together." He paused, his eyes tracing the petals. "I stopped coming here after the accident. I thought if I kept it untouched, it would stay ours." Claire understood. "Memories do not disappear when life moves forward," she said gently. "They stay. They change shape. They become part of the soil." Ethan looked at her with a tenderness she had not seen before. "You have a way of making things feel less frightening," he said. Claire offered a quiet smile. "Pain softens when someone shares it." He reached out then, not to touch her, but to open a wooden cabinet built into the base of the planter. Inside was a small watering can painted with childish stars. He held it carefully, his thumb brushing over one faded sticker. "She insisted on decorating it herself," he said. "She said the stars helped the plants grow." For a long moment, he held the watering can against his chest as if steadying his heartbeat. Then he handed it to Claire. "Would you help me?" he asked. "Just a little. I think it is time." Claire accepted the can with gentle hands. Together they watered the small plant, watching the soil darken and breathe. It was a simple act, but in the quiet greenhouse filled with sunlight and memories, it felt profound. When they finished, Ethan exhaled softly, almost as if releasing years of held breath. "Thank you," he said. "I do not think I could have done this alone." Claire looked at him with steady kindness. "You are not alone," she said. "Not anymore." Ethan met her eyes, and in that moment, the space between them felt warm, fragile, and honest, illuminated by more than just the morning sun. It felt like the beginning of hope taking root. Evening arrived with a gentle hush, the sky shifting into soft shades of rose and amber as the sun drifted lower toward the ocean. Claire walked the stone path back toward the mansion after leaving the greenhouse, feeling the warmth of the afternoon still lingering in the air. Something had changed inside Ethan today, something subtle but unmistakable, as if a closed door deep within him had finally cracked open to let in a sliver of light. When she entered the house, she found him standing in the living room near the wide windows, watching the horizon. He turned when he heard her steps, and for a moment they simply looked at each other in the glow of the fading sun. His expression was calm, reflective, almost vulnerable. "Thank you for today," he said softly. "For everything." Claire shook her head lightly. "You did the hard part," she replied. "I just walked beside you." Ethan stepped closer, his movements slow and thoughtful. "You do not understand," he said. "This island has been a place of silence for so long. A place where I kept my grief hidden. But you brought life back to it." Claire felt the weight of his words settle over her like warm sunlight. She lowered her gaze for a moment, then met his eyes again. "Sometimes a place just needs someone to listen," she said. Ethan smiled gently, a quiet, heartfelt smile that softened the edges of his face. "You listened," he said. "More than anyone ever has." They shared a long, peaceful silence before he gestured toward the staircase. "There is one last thing I want to show you," he said. Claire followed him upstairs, her heart thudding softly with each step. When they reached the hallway, Ethan paused outside the small room at the end. The door remained closed, but it no longer carried the same heaviness it once did. He looked at her, seeking reassurance. She nodded. He opened the door slowly. The room was just as they had left it that morning, filled with warm light and soft shadows. Ethan stepped inside, not hesitating this time. He walked to the wooden chest beneath the window, the one he had not touched in years. Claire stayed near the doorway, close enough to support him, far enough to give him space. Ethan knelt beside the chest and rested his hand on the lid. For several long seconds, he did not move. Then he looked back at Claire, his eyes steady. "Will you sit with me?" he asked. Claire crossed the room quietly and sat beside him on the floor. The comforting presence between them filled the room with something stronger than words. Ethan lifted the lid. Inside were small treasures carefully placed, a sun-faded photograph of his daughter holding a seashell to her ear, a tiny pair of sandals she once wore on the island, a folded piece of paper with glitter glued unevenly across the front, and a small journal with her name written in uneven letters. Ethan picked up the photograph first. His fingers trembled slightly, but his expression remained steady, a mixture of sadness and warmth. "She said the ocean could hear her," he whispered. Claire leaned closer, her voice gentle. "Maybe it still does." Ethan smiled softly, his eyes shining with quiet emotion. He reached for the small journal next, opening it with care. Inside were simple drawings, hearts, waves, smiling suns, and scribbled words. On one page, written in wobbly crayon letters, were the words, "For Daddy. Because you make the world bright." Ethan pressed his hand to his heart, as if steadying himself. Claire touched his shoulder lightly, offering comfort without intrusion. He looked at her then, not with grief alone, but with something new, hope, gratitude, and a deep sense of connection. "You helped me see all of this again," he said. "You helped me breathe in a way I have not in years." Claire felt her eyes warm, but she kept her voice steady. "You did not lose the love," she said. "You just needed someone to walk with you while you found it again." Ethan reached into the chest once more and pulled out a small, wrapped box. "She wanted to give this to you someday," he said quietly. "Not you specifically, but someone kind. Someone who would help me when I could not help myself." He placed the box gently in Claire's hands. Inside was a delicate shell necklace, strung on a thin thread. Claire looked up, touched beyond words. Ethan's voice softened. "You brought light back to this island," he said. "And to me." In the fading glow of the evening, surrounded by memories and new beginnings, Claire felt something shift, a quiet truth unfolding between them, tender and real, like the first spark of a future neither of them had imagined but both could finally see forming in the gentle light of healing.